れじゃなくて基本こっちを使う。これ。The same. You can use this one or you can use this one. Okay.
Good afternoon. We'd like to start the afternoon session. And the first session is 1 hour, which is about policy related, and especially German and Japan. And we'd like to have discussion.
で、まず午後の第一番
The first session is going to be participated in by 3 speakers. To your right or to your left is Tetsunari Ida, director of the ISRF, and he is also responsible for the Policy Innovation Division. Next to him is Mr. Martin Schuppe. He is the head of division in German Federal Ministry of the Environment, Nature, Conservation and Nuclear Safety. He was quite active in the Bonn Conference on Natural Resources. He is currently serving as the head of division in the International European Affairs in Renewable Energy. And right next to him is Christine Lim. She is Secretary General for REN 21, Renewable Energy 21, and he was also serving as the natural energy production in the industrial community, and he is currently looking at the policy matters relating to the use of natural resources or natural energy. So first speaker is going to be Mr. Ida Tetsunari Ida. He is going to give an oral discussion looking at the Japanese policy on renewable resources. We will have each speaker to give maybe 10 minutes of presentation first, and then we'll accept questions from the floor, maybe a couple of questions from the floor. And so please be prepared to ask questions when each one of the speakers are over. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. I am Executive Director of GREF and has been serving in the workshops for the use of natural resources as well. So in 2 days, we'll be marking the first anniversary of that fateful day. And a lot of events are being planned, and exactly in a year ago, At that moment, on that day, Steve Sawyer, Adni Annan was there for a conference in Germany, and the meeting was headed by the head of environmental minister, and was also the head of ethic committee looking at the future course of nuclear power generation in Germany. Klaus Stepper was there, and we were just gasped at the sight of events that was perpetrating in Japan. And so, in fact, there are three major steps that Japan had to go through as a result of 311. One is that this was the world most significant nuclear power accident in the world, and there is this Chernobyl accident in 79, and a 3 Mile Island in 86, and then 2011 in Fukushima. And the other three major events that we have to deplore is that the Japanese land has been radiated or has been exposed to very significant radiation for the third time following Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And then the other three events is that already we've talked oftentimes about post-war era, but now the 311 has now become the major turning point for the Japanese history. That is the third most important steps in history, first being the Meiji Restoration, the second being the end of the Second World War, and the third being this disaster of 2011. And so we are facing a number of crises, natural crises, including the potential depletion of fossil fuel. And in fact, this is hopefully going to go into the fourth very important innovation revolution for the human being, first being the agricultural, and the second industrial, and three is the IT revolution. And so this hopefully is going to be the fourth major revolution. And Zoran Hammerson said in the morning that the top-down decision has always been made for energy in a centrally focused decision-making process, and hopefully this will be made into a more distributed process of decision-making, and we are hoping that this is going to now happen. And out of that, in Japan, we are now faced with the turning point in history and the fourth revolution about to occur in the demands in the human history. But then, as you have heard from Mr. Koberial, that the Japanese industry is not prepared to get into new phases of introduction of new energy sources. For instance, the wind power only increased production by 80 megawatts last year, and in fact there is still persisting requests coming from the industry that they would like to continue to have nuclear power generation. And in Japanese committees, they are trying to figure out the newest orientation for the energy policy. However, this has not been made clear at all. So nothing seems to have changed on the surface, but below the water we see there is in fact a lot of work going on, maybe in the process, as a process of preparation for Japan to make a big leap over to a new era. So one is the literacy of the Japanese people over the question of nuclear power and the risk of exposure. is totally changed, and some 80% of the Japanese people now say that they don't want to continue to have a nuclear power, and I think this is irreversible. We'll never go back, and the literacy has been such that we're ready to do away with nuclear power, and particularly women and the youngsters who are very eager now to participate in the decision-making process in the society, and this is not likely to go back. And the other is that the de facto standard for us to communicate and connect is the use of social media. And this is, again, irreversible and indispensable. And apparently, many changes are happening in this country. And so our foundation is looking at the revision to come on the basis of a new concept based on a new renewable energy, so that the renewable energy be the center core of the vision. And I think the most important is the FIT policy decision was made. Quite a coincidence that this passed into a law on May 11th and has taken effect in August 26th. And the feed-in tariff is about to be started in July of this year. And we have made some specific proposal as to how this will be introduced. So there are some issues that are being discussed by the Ministry of Economy versus what's being discussed by the politicians. There seems some gap, but we do need to continue to make proposals based on a good level of discussion. So the question is, to what extent do we need to make our argument? Business community, finance community, all the people will have to come in for the discussion so that a healthy market can be established in this country for FIT. So with the feed-in tariff as the starting point, I think there are three important orientations that we need to look at for the future. One is the utilities market, electricity market. I think this is going to be discussed tomorrow morning. TEPCO is going to be nationalized, and how are we going to have an open and fair market established in this country. Eventually, the renewable resources, energy, has to be made available without any additional expenses, take into consideration the external cost in establishment of the energy cost. And this will be again discussed tomorrow morning. And likewise, as an alternative energy versus nuclear power, the energy has been often discussed, power generation has been discussed, but then there is also the question of the more specific policies to go into the use of heating energy, and also the resources not in man. There is this concept of a PIMBY rather than NIMBY. I think that's a new direction we'd have to look at. And more recently in Fukushima Prefecture in the Tohoku area, by 2040, they are going to establish 100% availability of power generation by natural resources. And that was the first decision to be made, in fact, in my involvement as well. But the Fukushima has made the declaration that they're going to into 100% natural energy production. And Minami Soma that Mr. Son talked about, scores of companies in Japan are coming in, as well as the billions of yen coming in from the national government, so that natural resources, again, renewable energy can be promoted. Mr. Sakurai and myself have been involved in the soliciting the ownership of the local people with the participation of the people in the community, so that the this will benefit the people in the community. And how we're going to do about this, this is another challenge we'd have to address. I'm running short of my time, but the very important thing is the transmission line. The renewable resources has to be connected into the existing grid, and the unified operation of the grid will be necessary. And as was mentioned in the morning, Asia smart grid may as well be established. Some new concept initiatives would have to be introduced to cover the entire region here in Asia. Thank you very much. So I would like to take some questions. So if you can be seated, or if you can possibly stay in the podium. I think some important keywords has been mentioned: distributed versus, and also open and fair supply of energy. And I think that would lead to distributed supply of energy. Do we have any questions from the floor, please? Maybe a couple of questions can be entertained at this point. We do have microphones available on the floor, so please pick up one of those microphones if you have any questions. Well, if not, I would like to proceed to the next speaker. And Mr. Steve Sawyer, can someone please bring him a microphone? Please wait until you have the microphone to speak.
Thank you, Tetsu. What will it take to break the electricity system monopoly, which prevents the change to the system that 80% of the people want? What's going to be the key thing? Is it going to be the nationalization, or does it need to be more than that?
The shortest cut we can find is probably that TEPCO must be nationalized, and I think this a political consensus has already been reached, and so that's the first step. And after it's been nationalized, then the TEPCO, or the areas serviced by the TEPCO, has to be restructured, and we have to start this discussion so that there's going to be a process of privatization of TEPCO, and by then we should have a more distributed system in place, more competitive electric utilities to come in. And at this time, the electricity utilities business law and the monopoly or the law has to be revised, and unbundling of the power generation and transmission has to be established. And perhaps there's going to be an entire overall restructuring of the utilities across the nation. So rather than just for the national government should stop subsidizing the transmission lines, so that there should be a Japanese transmission company that will be has a free market scheme to be established. And there may be other scenarios, but that's probably the most likely scenario. So what would be the time span we'll be looking at? There's this immediate, imminent nationalization of the TEPCO, but what next, and when, and about when things would happen? Well, legal framework would require a certain time before it can be amended, so maybe at least 2 years' time would be necessary for the amendment of the law. And with the current condition in the parliament, it's very little likely that a new law can be established, so a new administration would be necessary after a general election. And so considering all that, maybe 3 to 5 years' time would be necessary. Thank you, Mr. Ida. I'd like to now call on the next speaker.
So Martin Schuppert, please come on to the stage. And Germany is the leader of the world, and he's going to talk about renewable energy in Germany, and also expectation for Japan. He's from International European Affairs Chief.
distinguished participants of the RE Vision 2012, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's a great pleasure for me to participate in today's conference of the Japan Renewable Energy Foundation. I feel deeply honored to participate in such a knowledgeable audience here. How to make energy policy the most sustainable? I think this has become a decisive issue for elections in many countries. I would like to thank the Japanese Renewable Energy Foundation, in particular Thomas Karberger and Mika Obayashi, but also Tetsu Ida, Mr. Son and his entire team, in fact, for convening this conference at such a timely moment. Renewable energy is an area where Japan and Germany have several common features. Above all, the fact that we rely heavily on energy imports. You see here that the energy imports for the European Union increases from 45% in the 1990s up to more than 60% in 2030. More than 2/3 of the energy, the fossil fuel energy, will be imported, and Germany is exactly in the middle of that range. The other issue is that we are both highly industrialized countries with world-leading innovation capacity and cutting-edge technologies. Japan was a pioneer in photovoltaics and among the few countries in Europe, in the US, in 2004, leading that market. Let me start with a look at some fundamental global trends that will shape energy policy structures, not only in Europe, in Germany or in Europe, but also in the world up to 2050. The global population will continue to grow considerably, probably to around 9 billion people by 2050. At the same time, in the medium term, 1/3 of the global population without regular electricity supply will gain improved access to energy, electricity and water. As a consequence, it is estimated that the global energy demand will double by 2050. We have seen dropping prices for almost all of the renewable energy technologies. Just here to have a look at the PV sector, where the module cost dropped by 22% with each doubling of the capacity. On the other hand, there is a strong growth in the renewable energy investments, more than a threefold increase just within 10 years. China, Germany, US, Italy, Brazil, among the leading top 5 countries. There is an urgent need to decouple greenhouse gas emissions, in particular CO2 emissions, from the energy sector, from the further economic development. With our current global energy system, we are on the way to a 6 degrees Celsius increase of the global temperature by the end of this century. Mankind is hardly able to compete with this. Ladies and gentlemen, with this global setting, Germany's goal is to achieve a virtually carbon-free energy supply by 2050. With our energy concept of September 2010 and our package of measures for accelerating the transformation process, Germany has decided to focus on greater energy efficiency, to increase efficiency up to 20% by 2020 and up to 50% by 2050. This entire set of goals makes a paradigm shift in our energy supply. The underlying rationale is and was our conviction that renewable energy and energy efficiency are the 2 pillars that will secure our energy supply for the future. We believe that this path can make us one of the most competitive economies in the world. Germany has set out within this energy concept a clear roadmap up to 2050. Our goal is to increase the share of renewables in gross electricity consumption up to 35% by 2020, 50% by 2030, and up to 80% by 2050. Also, the greenhouse gas emission reduction has to continue, -40% up to 2020 and -80% to 95% by 2050. Within this concept, Germany has decided to phase out nuclear power by 2022. The 7 oldest plants already are decommissioned. 10 nuclear power plants are still in operation and will be phased out in the coming years, 2 each year up to 22. The question was, what was the reaction on the power market and on the prices for power? This is the price at the spot market where 25% of power is traded each day. You see the average price of 50 euro per megawatt hour or 5 euro cent per kilowatt hour as an average, sometimes down to 0, sometimes up to 12 euro cent, as it was the case in early February this year, where we had 2 weeks of very cold temperatures, minus 15 degrees, a point in time where we had to export power to France because France uses electricity for heating in very badly isolated houses. So as you can see, in the beginning of March last year, when the decision was taken to phase out nuclear, there was no major shift in energy prices on the spot market. The second question is, do we import more than we export before the shutdown of the nuclear power plants? First, we are a member of an internal market, so we have interconnections with our neighboring states, and there are imports from, on the left side, France, Czech Republic, Austria, Denmark, a couple of other countries. But we also export, mainly to Austria, Denmark, Netherlands, Switzerland. This is a chart over the last year from January to November, but still the saldo at the end of the year was a net exporter of 3.7 terawatt hours. So Germany, being even a much bigger exporter beforehand, has remained an exporter of power in the last year. But as you can see, we imported much power from France. So the question is, did we import nuclear power from France? This is the merit-order curve of the French power sector. As you can see, mainly powered by nuclear power plants, uranium, hard coal, gas, hydro, oil, and at the end, pump storage. According to their marginal costs, it's evident that nuclear power can be produced at around 20 euro per megawatt hour or 2 euro cent per megawatt hour. Coal is a little bit more expensive, gas too, then hydro, and the most expensive, as you just experienced in Japan, is oil. So nuclear is always on the market. There was no nuclear power plant in France awaiting for the Energiewende in Germany. France even produced more nuclear power in 2008 and 2009 than in 2011. So all the power that German companies may import from France comes from those technologies that are on the right hand here and thereby the most expensive on the market. It's not nuclear power that is exported to Germany. Ladies and gentlemen, it is clear that the Energiewende, the transformation of our system, cannot be achieved from one day to the next day. In fact, it's a project for the coming century, and it will be a huge technology challenge for us, as it will have to make significant changes to our energy supply and energy infrastructure. We are part of the European Union. We have set targets up to 2020. Germany has a national target of 18% of renewables from the final energy consumption. We have national policies. The blue countries here are those in the European Union that use feed-in tariffs. The red one, certificates, and those in the middle have a combination of both. Germany has considerable experience in the field of promoting renewables in the electricity sector with our Renewable Energy Sources Act, a feed-in tariff system. Let me outline a couple of issues, but before that, I will show you that we increased the renewables share in the electricity consumption from 6.5 to 17.1 in 2010, and last year it was 20%. The target up to 2020 is 35%, as I already indicated. The cornerstones of our feed-in system are first, a guaranteed access for renewable energy to the power grid, and then second, a priority transmission and distribution. This is the more value and important if the market is not yet liberalized and the companies not yet unbundled. In vertically integrated companies, it is important to give competitors such a guaranteed access and a priority transmission. It is a fixed price that is set per kilowatt hour to give to the operator for 20 years. The tariffs are technology specifically set for each specific technology. They have an annual regression due to the technical development, and those additional costs through the tariffs are equalized by all the consumers in Germany, a cost that arose up to 3.5 euro cent per kilowatt hour. These are the costs for the consumer. Currently in 2011, the average cost per kilowatt hour was around 25 euro cent, out of which 3.5 came from the share of renewables through the EEG, and this is the development coming from less than 1 euro cent. Ladies and gentlemen, in the photovoltaic sector in particular, we have had to learn what happens if a young and expensive technology experiences an unexpected and very dynamic drop. If this happens, it is vital to be able to react quickly in order to avoid market overheating and excessive support. The red line here shows the system cost decrease on the market, and the other lines, some countries that tried to cope with the development as quickly as possible. We had a bubble here. This is the line for Germany that costs much additional support, but still we were able to cope relatively quickly. It was more difficult for Spain, for Italy, and for the Czech Republic. This decrease of the costs led to a PV tariff as of the 1st of January 2012 in the range of 24 to 18 euro cent. 18 euro cent for installations larger than 1 megawatt on the ground, up to 24 euro cents for small-scale installations, rooftop applications. If you remember the retail price of the household consumer, 25 euro cent, as I just mentioned, the figures, at least those in red here, are those where the grid parity is already achieved. So in Germany, as of this year, grid parity is achieved with large-scale applications. As we had again a massive increase in photovoltaics last year, 7.5 gigawatt was added only in 12 months, we had again to reduce the tariffs. There's a governmental proposition to reduce them as of 1st of April in the range of 19.5 euro cent for small installations up to 10 kilowatt, 16.5 up to 1 megawatt, and 13.5 up to 10 megawatt. With all these tariffs, we are within grid parity, and we'll see that the Parliament will adopt this decision. We are in a very difficult market situation, showing here that modules coming from China and Taiwan flood world markets in Europe, in the US, and the question is how the industry will develop. But be aware of the fact that an entire PV system has many components. It's not only the polysilicon, the wafer, the cell, the module, the manufacturing profit, but it's also transport, support frame, converter, and manufacturing. At least in Germany, more than 50% of this, even with imported modules, with imported cells, is local content. There's another issue on the grid integration. I just took yesterday evening the chart of the power production of yesterday in Germany. On the top is the PV production during daylight. This is the wind energy, and all the other is fossil, nuclear, and bioenergy. You can see that in a considerable share, more than 10%, comes from wind energy, almost 10% from PV. The German grid is able to cope with this without any major changes so far. To come from 0 to 10% or to 0 from 20% is not a question of batteries or additional storage. We have a little bit hydropower for storage, but not much. So this can be fed in the grid without changing the grid in the first hand. But then, of course, if I would go from 10 or 20 to 100%, that becomes a question of grid expansion. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very keen to exchange with our partners on renewable energy policies and on the related tasks of market and system integration, in particular with colleagues here in Japan. We know very well that Japan is in the middle of a process to consider a new policy and in particular to increase the share of renewable energy. We are interested in continuing and deepening our bilateral exchange and cooperation. There's a huge potential for cooperation and exchange on the experience we have regarding policy and framework setting. Industry and business in our two countries have a high level of expertise and excellent products and solutions. Also, NGOs should be included in a dialogue to discuss, for example, cost acceptance issues of feed-in tariff mechanisms between consumer associations. I would be very pleased if our two countries could pool their experience and know-how at all levels, even more in the future, and I'm looking forward to the exchange we will have in the next weeks and months. The Germans plan to generate a quarter of their power from the solar energy by 2020. If only we had access to German sunshine. Thank you very much.
はい、マッチありがとうございました。素晴らしいお話の途中にちょっと世界
Thank you very much. Sorry to
では一つだけもし質問があれば会場から受けたい。
Sorry to rush you. Is there any question? Well, because of the time, I'd like to invite the next speaker. Kristen Lin, please.
Thank you very much, Mika. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Well, as you can imagine, it's quite a challenge to speak after the renewable energy champion Germany. But the news I have here with me to share with you is actually that this example is finding replication in many countries. And nowadays, when we talk about renewable energy, it's not only a luxury, it is a must, and it's something that people really aspire to have. I just remember I started to work in a regional energy agency in Austria back in the 90s. And when I finished university and I started to work for the renewable sector, all my student colleagues, they were going to Procter & Gamble and these companies, and they were asking what I'm doing, and I said renewable energy. And when I said biomass, they had no clue what all this is about. And nowadays, when you say, I work in the field of renewables, this is what people really find challenging, find innovative, find the future, and I think this is something we need to build up. And we see that there is a momentum on the global market that we have to continue to build, and will not be a matter of technology, but it will be clearly a matter of the political will and our ambition to make this future happen as quickly as possible. A word about REN21. We are a multi-stakeholder network composing governments, proactive governments such as Germany, such as Denmark, but also India and other governments of the world, international organizations such as IRENA, UNIDO, the IEA, industry associations, many of which will speak in the next session and present to you the latest market and industry developments, and also NGOs and the finance sector, because clearly only public and private sector together will really make a difference and will make something happen. Adnan Amin pointed it out in his opening remarks this morning. We currently have 16% of our final energy demand coming from renewable energy globally, with increasing demand, and clearly this is only a first step. We now have, in 2012, the International Year of Sustainable Energy for All, the UN Secretary General has declared 2012 this international year with 3 targets: ensuring access to energy by 2030 for everybody, reducing the energy intensity, increasing energy efficiency, and doubling the share of renewables. And also this will only be a first milestone in really transforming our energy system and giving renewables the place they deserve. The success stories we have in the different areas, particularly in the field of electricity, speak for themselves. We have at the moment 25% of total global power generating capacity renewables based, and these 25% delivered 20%, 1/5 of global electricity production. And here on my slide, because these are the figures from 2010, it's still written that renewables accounted for roughly half of the total new power generating capacity installed. The latest figures that we have for Europe show that in the year 2011, from all the new electricity capacity that was added onto the system, more than 70% were renewables based. So this is clearly indicating a trend that what we add to our systems is not anymore much less conventional fuels, but there is a lot of renewables added. We have a tendency when we talk about energy to focus exclusively on the electricity sector, and I think we should also bear in mind that renewables can deliver magnificent solutions for heating and cooling, and also for the transport sector. We have a large share of our final energy consumption, nearly 50% used for heating and cooling our buildings, and this is something that we must not forget, because clearly we also need to make some further progress in these fields. We have beautiful examples, and I guess we'll hear some of them in the afternoon, on how biomass, geothermal and solar thermal can really make a major contribution to heating and also to cooling our buildings. In the field of transport, this is very often the forgotten area where solutions are more complicated. There is different roads to go. There is definitely a lot of discussion about whether it will be using electricity for transport by electric cars, whether it will be down the road of biofuels. I think there are lots of ways that are interesting and that should be explored. Martin had that slide already in his transparency, and very often when you put this up in an audience that is not exclusively dealing with the renewable sector, people are surprised when they hear that 211 billion euros, or if you count also hydro and solar thermal investments, more than 270 billion US dollars were invested in the field of renewable energy in 2010. And so the first indicative figures we have for 2011 is that these 211 billion went up to 260. So we see, to 216. We see there is a positive trend. It is a bit of slowing down. I mean, we are living in at the moment challenging economic times, but still the signal is a positive one, and the trend goes upwards. What is this all due? I would say that the main basis for this quite impressive growth of the renewables industry is clearly stable, well-defined policies. And what we see, and I think Germany is really the example there for showing that continuity and stability is not only providing impressive figures in the field of energy generation, but it's also a trigger for creating jobs, creating sustainable jobs, creating jobs people are really happy with. And nowadays we have around 3.5 million people employed in the renewables industry. And clearly those countries that have stability, a stable policy framework, are the ones benefiting most from these trends. And this slide, I think, is particularly interesting because we see that it's not only more luxury of some, but many countries have actually jumped on board this train, and we have nowadays in about 120 countries all around the world, policies and targets that are promoting renewables. And what is also interesting, I think, is that more than half of these targets and policies can be found in developing countries. And also, when we look back to the investment slide, more than half of the global investment actually happens in the developing world. And I think this is something which is really very interesting, because renewables started in the developed world but are spreading rapidly, and I think we have to watch out to really stay on board this train and further also give the example here. And also what we clearly see is that many of these policies, I would say back in the 90s, they were mainly driven by environmental concerns. Of course, environmental concerns still play quite an important role, but it is clearly also that nowadays more and more focus when putting renewables policies in place, when putting renewable policies in place, is on security of supply and is on economic growth and creating job opportunities and industrial development opportunities. So the comprehensive information about the global renewable energy picture can be found in REN21's global status report that, thanks to ICEP, is even available in Japanese. So from the ICEP website, I guess you can download the publication and find all the latest trends. The new version is going to come out at the beginning of June. We are quite heavily working also with many partners that are here today to compile and provide a concise overview of the latest trends that you will have available soon. What is in the cards for the future? This is clearly a difficult question. We don't really have a crystal ball, and but I think what we can definitely see when we look into this is we have to look at the examples of the past. I come from Europe, and back in the 90s, the European Union developed the first indicative target of 12% renewable energy by 2010. By the time this white paper target was adopted in 1997, people thought that this is crazy, that this is not realistic, that this is not going to happen. Now we see the target was achieved. We were right on target. At the end of 2010, 12.4% of final energy consumption were coming from renewables. And I think this is a starting point. And what exactly is the future, we don't really know. But what we see is that many very authoritative publications like the International Panel on Climate Change in their special report on renewable energy showcase that, of course, a range is possible, but it is possible that close to 80% of the world's energy supply could be met with renewables, and not ages ago, but by the mid of this century. And I think this is possible if the right policy framework is in place. Also, the International Energy Agency is clearly declaring renewables as the fastest growing sector of the energy mix. And there are many others that basically show a way on how this can be done. And in order to stimulate the debate and the dialogue on the future, REN21, together with its lead author, Eric Martineau, who is with us here today, who is, you are lucky, based here in Tokyo, has been doing work on the Global Futures Report, which is a vision on providing a simple overview on how the future of renewable energy is currently seen by prominent experts from government, from institutions, and from the industry. Eric was quite busy interviewing lots of people, and the Global Status Report was actually for the first time presented here in Japan these days, and you will have the privilege. I really encourage you to stay with us until the end of today, because the last session of today is on the Global Futures Report and providing some insights in what people think. Cooperation is absolutely crucial. And so REN21 is also working with governments on facilitating international renewable energy conferences. These have a tradition. They started back in 2004 with the Renewables 2004 in Germany, then continued in China in 2005, the US in 2008, India in 2010, and the next International Renewable Energy Conference will be hosted by the United Arab Emirates in January 2013. And we are currently looking for the host of the next IREC, where we would be welcoming innovative proposals from different countries on how we can stimulate further this debate on public-private partnerships, a very impressive example of which I think is all the commitment we see here, and the really very inspiring speech of Son San this morning, where he just says, the heart has to be there and the ideas have to be there, and then we can really make it happen together. So let's do this. Thank you.
クリスティンありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions to Christine?
よろしいですか？
If not,
お願いいたします。お名前と
your name and affiliation, please. My name is Saiki Ryota from Waseda University. So regarding developing nations, I understand that renewable energy activity is getting very active. So is that because developed nations are asking them to do that, or are they taking that as their own initiative? Do they show their passion to renewable energy on their own? Which is it?
もう一問。
Anyone else? Christine?
Thank you very much for your question. So I think you can give examples, but the action really has to be done by country, and I think the developing countries, they face completely different challenges than the developed world. For them, access to energy is a very important topic, and so they actually need to further increase their capacity, and very often renewables on the one hand are absolutely cost competitive with conventional solutions, and secondly, often these projects are just much quicker to be built, so they don't need so long building permits, etc. And also they have a much bigger, often local component where they generate jobs in the countries and are really providing sustainable solutions. So I think this is a trend that we see with development of renewables in developing countries that is definitely going to further develop and definitely also going to increase as the costs of all these technologies are coming down.
まあ、例えば初めのプレナリー
So I think in the start plenary, Ms. Amina Varina talked about the fact that the promotion of renewable energy is a very important pillar in developing nations, and they have plans to assist that as well. So from that perspective, we can say that the energy issue in the developing nation is not just an issue for them, but as a global issue, there are efforts being provided and frameworks to support that. Thank you.
こちらのスピーカーの方に私から、まあ、特にマーチンと
I would like to ask some questions to Martin and Christine. After 3/11, it's a year. Do you have any expectations of Japan or how Japan can contribute in the future? Do you have any expectations of Japan, please?
Well, I mean, it's always very difficult when you come from the outside in order to give recommendations and to give conditions. I just think that Japan has tremendous knowledge in industrial development. I think there was a lot of going on here, or it's a lot of going on in some renewable areas such as PV. And I think that if consistent policies are put in place to really create a sustainable framework, then this is not only going to be very, very beneficial for Japan as a country, but is also going to put your industry back in a leading position on the global market to deploy solutions there. So we are are optimistic, and especially after hearing Mr. Sonsan this morning and also seeing, I mean, I had the privilege to be here with the creation of this foundation back in September, and to see how in this in this short time progress was made. I think we are very optimistic that things can happen, and I think that our partners here, be it JREF, be it ISEB, will really ensure that something is going to happen. Whatever we can do to facilitate this will be at your sides.
I think that all the ingredients that you need for a successful renewable energy policy and development are here. Japan is a highly industrialized country, highly qualified workers, staff, cutting-edge technologies. Japan was, as I said, a pioneer in photovoltaics. So from the technology point of view, Japan is even first. On the other hand, it is a national interest in lowering the high dependence on fossil fuel imports. Those are volatile, those have the tendency to increase, so there's a severe national interest in doing so. There are many other factors. The local employment that is linked to the deployment of renewable energy, the entrepreneurship. I was fascinated this morning in listening to Mr. Son and his engagement in the business sector, and I may see that there are many others in the renewable sector. But what do you have to need to make a good cake out of many excellent ingredients? You need to have a clear recipe. Recipe gives you the order how to deal with it, and the recipe in this case is a clear, transparent, reliable energy policy set on framework conditions that give new investments a clear chance, coming through either independent power producers or through the existing power sector. Both are possible. We have seen both, although it was mainly the independent power producer who was the driving force. So to give them space for development, that has to be designed in a national policy on a sound legal basis.
ありがとうございます。いや、やはり
Thank you very much. After 311, the options for Japan for energy policy, particularly nuclear power, is likely to affect a lot of other countries of the world as well. So with this advice, we need to have a good policy. But now, Mr. Ida, listening to the presentation by Germany and looking at the other countries of the world, do you have any comments to make? The information that we need to learn, of course, and as well written in documents, as well as the knowledge and wisdom to be shared by living people. Well, there are a lot that we had to learn, and the question that is being asked of us is how can we really apply this to the Japanese society as we look to the future. This is the responsibility we need to fulfill for the Japanese community as well for the world community. And so this knowledge, experience would have to be received well and put into some actual actions with goodwill. Will to act, individuals, each one of us having this will to act so that we can benefit ourselves as well as the future course of future generations. Of course, there are a number of discussion points for me as if I were to propose specific policies, but I think we need to accept the current status and then have the will to act on that will, so that we can perpetuate some good changes in the community. And I hope that this will not only happen in Japan, but also from the rest of the world as well. And so let's work together and let's act on our will. Thank you. I think that was a very good summary of the discussion as we look at the dynamic world, particularly countries who have been successful in the establishment of the renewable energy sources, such as Germany. It is very important we learn from them, and also so that we'll be able to produce a good system under which we can create natural resources. And we need to try and construct a good new framework for the promotion of renewable resources. We would like to now have about 10-minute break, and we'll go into the next session where we're going to have a discussion on the renewable energy market perspectives, including the question of financing. Thank you very much. We now break for 10 minutes.
以上をもちまして
So this concludes session 1 this afternoon, and we'll now have a coffee break. The next session will begin at 2:10, 10 minutes after 2.
program